Hello and welcome back to the Biggest Alpha Male podcast. I'm your host, Dudebro, and today I'd like to send a special message to my first subscriber. F*** you. Who the f*** unsubscribes from a one subscriber channel? Before we get into it, I'd like to address allegations about my arm. Yes, indeed, I did fight off 15 burglars that were mugging grannies, but one of them did actually have a shotgun, so that explains the arm. And no, I am not Batman, but almost.
I'm almost Batman.
I recently watched Drew's video about how tech is no longer fun, and I want to give my 2 cents because I used to be a tech content creator slash reviewer, and part of the reason why I quit was because it became boring. I'm just going to rapid fire a few points so that you understand sort of how I feel. One of the main ways to prove my take is with video game consoles. Objectively, they peaked about 10 to 15 years ago, and the way you can prove that is that today's consoles don't really hold up their value as much as the old ones do. You can buy a DS or a PSP for about $100 to $200, which is insane because they're about 20 years old. And the reason is because people still love their DSs, still love their Game Boys, still love their PSPs. And the upgrades back then were also massive. Today, not so much. And I'm not saying that we don't have cool gaming consoles, like the Steam Deck is awesome. But you tell me it took us 20 years to go from the PSP to the Steam Deck. And phones really do feel like in the past 5 years, they've not really changed. The best value phones are flagship phones from 5 years ago. So like the 12 Pro is insanely good for the price, and it's insanely good generally. You won't really notice a difference from a day-to-day basis using the newest phone or the phone from 5 years ago. Obviously, there's performance bumps, there's better cameras, there's better screens, higher refreshment screens. Unless you've got an iPhone, then it's the same. But all of that doesn't really matter on a day-to-day basis. You won't really notice it. It's not something that you'd call revolutionary or exciting. Tech doesn't only feel bland because of the lack of meaningful upgrades for physical tech. It's also the virtual side. Softwares and services just have become worse. For example, everything requires a subscription, and everybody purchases the subscriptions, not because they want to, but because the alternative options become impossible to access or just aren't as good. And somehow you end up paying for a service that will still give you ads. You can't share it with your friends and has no shows on it. And apps. Why does everything have an app? You go to the supermarket and you need an app. My air fryer requires an app. Just to use my computer alone, I need software for my mouse, my keyboard, and my headset. Just let me use my device. It feels so unnecessary, and honestly, probably the only reason why it's happening is for data collection. They don't actually care about the user experience as much as they care about the data that they will collect. And it really feels like we've got the technology to make some really meaningful and impacting technology, but we just choose not to, like AI. Just because you put AI in your app doesn't make your app better. In fact, it usually makes it worse. Yet there's so many good ways to use AI, but we just choose not to. There's a bunch of creative ways, like why can't we put AI in my air fryer so that it can detect if my potatoes with some image recognition are ready to be flipped, but we can create videos of fat cats getting married post on Instagram? Or like, why can we not put AI in my smart home assistant, but we can put it in sexting apps so that lonely people can talk to AI bots? Or like, why can't we use AI to personalize tests and education to each student, but instead we use it to cheat on the education system? And all of this like really pisses me off. Thankfully, we've got AI energy drinks to cool me down. A composition of chemicals that a human could not create. And part of the reason why I think brands aren't actually making meaningful upgrades to their products is because they don't really understand what makes their product good or bad. Switching to the middle finger. Sorry, my pointer finger hurts. It baffles me how if you buy a headset and just use the stock settings, it will often sound completely bloated, muddy, and very bassy. But if you go to Reddit and search the correct EQ settings for the headset, it'll suddenly sound decent. And this happens all the time. It's the same with monitors too. Most monitors out of the box will have terrible color accuracy. They'll usually be really oversaturated or really undersaturated. But if you just tweak a few settings, it's going to be a whole lot better. But you tell me some random guy on Reddit knows how to do it, but the brand itself does not? Why? And I can remember this one brand, which I think summarizes the whole industry quite well. They sent me a couple headsets to try out and test back in the day, and some of them were really good and cheap and had surprisingly good audio. But some other ones, some of them were even more expensive and sounded so much worse. They were the biggest pieces of dog shit I've ever tried. They sounded terrible. And we're not even talking about a different series of headsets. We're talking about one version to the other. It really just feels like they're gambling, and sometimes it works, so they make their profits, but the rest of the time they just take the loss and create a new product. I'd also like to mention a couple specific tech examples that have just not changed over the past decade. Starting off strong with printers. Printers still have the same issues that they had 10 years ago. They're big, bulky, and expensive without creating amazing images unless you pay a big premium. They still clog up and everything. But the only advancement we've made in the past 10 years is subscriptions. Yes, you can buy a subscription for your ink, and oh god, it gets worse. You've got a limit for how many prints you can do within the month. So if you do print extra, they will charge you. I shit you not. The ink that's in your printer is not yours. You're subscribing to it, and if you use more of it, you pay a premium. Thanks, HP. And let's not get started on cellular signal. I went to London, out of all places, one of the biggest capitals in the world. Yet, I could still not get consistent signal. And we love 5G. 5G is so fast and nice and amazing until it's not, because it's short range. Yet we're still installing more 5G networks instead of making sure we actually have signal everywhere. Install more 4G networks, please, instead of 5G ones, so that I can actually get signal under a tree. And why can't I use my cellular signal in the plane? You tell me you really can't figure out that problem, humanity? And don't even get started with airplane Wi-Fi. At this point, I think it's an actual myth. I've never seen free airplane Wi-Fi. I'm not paying for that shit because it doesn't even work. How is there not a real solution to this problem yet? And Bluetooth also fucking sucks. You still can't talk to someone on the phone that's wearing a Bluetooth headset without it sounding like a slodgy mess. And what if I want to send a file to my friend that's sitting right next to me? Can we use Bluetooth for that? Fuck no, it doesn't work. We could use AirDrop if they've both got an iPhone, but guess what? That barely works half the time. It fails usually, and somehow it's one of the most glazed pieces of technology. Because AirDrop doesn't work and you can't send it to your Android friends, you end up sending the picture on Instagram. But when you send it on Instagram, it's compressed into oblivion like any other social media network. How can we still not send high-resolution pictures via a social media chat? Did you know that we have solutions so that you never have stick drift on your controller ever again? Yet PlayStation and Xbox choose not to use that technology. Smartwatches are cool, they like normal watches, only they do extra things, but they don't do those extra things well enough for you to trust it. You know that if you actually listen to how many calories it tells you you're burning, you could gain a ton of weight or lose a ton of weight and you wouldn't even know why. It's not even remotely close to being reliable. Maps and GPS have been the same thing for the past 10 years. Half the time that I use the app, it thinks I'm moonwalking, and it also eats up all my battery. And then finally, tech repairability. This may be the worst one of all. Back in the day, your phone broke, you could repair it. Now, it's so hard, so expensive to do. You try installing third-party screens on iPhones, for example, and they'll lock features. Although they could unlock them, they choose not to. Companies used to be more repairable, they used to be more compliant, but they choose to no longer be. The repairs that they offer themselves are stupid expensive. And yes, part of the reason is because your phone is now waterproof, it's more compact, it's more light, it's got more features, but it's not the reason why. The reason why is because of tech greed. These brands are creating valuable but very real trash. Anyway, let's end on a slightly lighter note. Here are a couple things that have stayed the same for many, many years, and I can't necessarily explain why, but I want them to progress, and I would like to see some new innovative tech. Starting off strong with toilets. Toilets are shit. Made for shit and are shit. It honestly feels like ancient technology. Also, it really feels primitive brushing your teeth with toothpaste and a toothbrush. There's no way there's not a better way to kill bacteria in my mouth. House keys, you tell me we can trust financial transactions with just a tap of a card, but we can't do the same with my house? Talking about financial transactions, how do bank transfers take 2 to 3 days? Isn't it all digital? What are we waiting for? Batteries, I swear to God, batteries have been the same since I was born. And finally, the last one. In 2025, we thought we'd have flying cars. Instead, we can't even make a good bus. How do we have bad public transport?